What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the OnePlus Nord N20 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Now, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we're getting a 6.43-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 409, a 20:9 aspect ratio, and an 85.3% screen-to-body ratio. With the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and an 85.8% screen-to-body ratio. So both of these phones do have really good displays, and they also have slightly different strong points. On one hand, the OnePlus Nord N20 5G does have a slightly better quality display, despite them both having 1080p resolutions. With an AMOLED display, you're going to get brighter and bolder colors, and the viewing angles are also going to be a little bit better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, things are going to be a lot easier to see with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. Now, on the other hand, as you can clearly see here, the Moto G Stylus 5G is much larger, and not only this, but it also has a taller and more narrow form factor, and this is going to give you a better scrolling experience. And if you're doing something in landscape mode, like watching a video for example, you're going to get a much more immersive experience as well. So it really comes down to personal preference. For me, I would rather have a better quality display, and with an AMOLED, the OnePlus Nord N20 5G's display just looks so nice. But if you want things to be larger and easier to see, then I could definitely understand why some people might prefer the Moto G Stylus 5G instead. In addition to this, I almost completely forgot to mention, with the 120Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz refresh rate, the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to have slightly faster and smoother movement on the screen. So if you're doing a lot of stuff like watching videos and playing games, you might get a slightly better experience with this phone. But that being said, in my personal experience, even though a 120Hz display is nice, it still really doesn't beat the advantage of having an AMOLED display. But at the end of the day, despite their differences, both phones do have really good displays for this price range. Now for storage, with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 256GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now keep in mind, this phone in my hand is the factory unlocked version, and if you get it through a carrier, it might be different. But for the purpose of this video, I will say the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a huge advantage here, because no matter which carrier you have, you can always go with the factory unlocked version that does have this much storage. And as far as I know, every version of the OnePlus Nord N20 5G only has 128. But that being said, even 128GB is still a good amount of storage, and honestly, unless you're really a power user and you have a bunch of apps and photos and videos and stuff like that, you probably won't need more than 128 anyway. And keep in mind, both phones also do have microSD card expansion, so if you have a lot of photos and videos, for example, this is definitely going to come in handy. Now for security features, both phones do have fingerprint scanners. With the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, it's right here in the display. Let's give it a try. And there we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, it's real fast and responsive, and having an in-display fingerprint scanner definitely makes the phone look a little bit more modern and premium. Now with the Moto G Stylus 5G, although it doesn't have an in-display fingerprint scanner, it does have a real nice one right here on the power key, which is definitely a convenient spot for it. So let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners work really well, and keep in mind, both phones also have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setups here, with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Then with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got another hole punch, except this one is in the center instead of being off to the side, and this camera is 16 megapixels as well. Then on the back, with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we got a triple camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a triple camera setup as well, with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, they are pretty similar. Of course, both phones do have triple camera setups, but the Moto G Stylus 5G actually does have an ultra wide camera, whereas with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, it only has a macro camera and not both. So in general, if you want a wider variety of features and you want to get that ultra wide camera, then the Moto G Stylus 5G, of course, is going to have an advantage. Now, as far as the quality goes, I would say it is pretty similar, and it's at the point where I wouldn't really make a decision between these two phones based on that alone. Now, that being said, if you do want to see full photo and video samples from these phones, be sure to check out my full reviews of them on the channel. But in general, I would say whether you're only taking a few photos here and there, or you're taking a lot of photos, maybe for social media for example, either of these phones will definitely get the job done. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, with the OnePlus Nord N20 we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we actually have the same exact processor, but with this phone we are getting 8GB of RAM. But keep in mind that this again is the factory unlocked version, and if you get this phone through a carrier, it might be different. Now, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on this phone, and with the OnePlus Nord N20 we're getting a single core score of 683 and a multi-core score of 1972. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 622 and a multi-core score of 1928. So as you can see, they are really close. In fact, as far as performance goes, you're probably really not even going to notice a difference at all, which definitely does make sense because after all, these phones do have the exact same processor. So just like with the photo quality, I definitely wouldn't make a decision between these two phones based on just this alone. But that being said, what I do recommend doing is running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, because that's going to give you a good indication of whether or not either of these phones will be an upgrade for you. So as far as overall performance goes, these phones are pretty much as good as you can possibly get with a mid-range phone, and while there may be some phones in this price range that might be a little bit faster, you're really not going to notice any major differences unless you get something like a flagship phone. And in addition to this, of course, as the names of both of these phones suggest, they do get 5G connectivity, so you get access to your carrier's 5G network and the latest and greatest technology and all that good stuff, so definitely keep this in mind as well. Now for the battery, with the OnePlus Nord N20 we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that supports 33 watt fast charging, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging. So first of all, these phones both have really good batteries, and the difference between 4500 and 5000 mAh really isn't that much. But that being said, if you do want the biggest battery with the longest life possible, then the Moto G Stylus 5G of course will have a little bit of an advantage. But on the other hand, I do think 33 watt fast charging versus 15 watt fast charging definitely will make a difference, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have a whole lot of time to charge your phone. And in addition to this, usually even if a phone has great fast charging, the wall adapters they come with, if they do come with one at all, is usually only something like 5 watts. But on the other hand, with the OnePlus Nord N20 you actually do get a 33 watt fast charger, and this was included, which is definitely a real nice thing, because if you had to go out and buy this yourself, it would be a little pricey. So again, while the Moto G Stylus 5G does have the advantage of having a larger battery, I feel like the fast charging on the OnePlus Nord N20 kind of outweighs this. But at the end of the day, it does come down to personal preference, and really in general, no matter which phone you go with, either one of them is going to have great battery performance. Now when it comes to software, one thing to keep in mind is that with the OnePlus Nord N20 this phone unfortunately only has Android 11, whereas with the Moto G Stylus 5G it does have Android 12. Now this is really weird to me because Android 13 is really right around the corner, so I don't know why OnePlus released a new phone that only has Android 11. That really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially with how premium this phone feels. But if you do want the newest version of Android, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will have an advantage. Now Motorola is pretty good with updates, while not being quite as good as something like Samsung for example, but at the same time, again, this phone does have Android 12, whereas the OnePlus Nord N20 unfortunately only has Android 11. Another thing to know is that both of these phones do have NFC, so if you like to make mobile contactless payments using tap and pay, then you can do that with either of these. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Honestly, this is actually kind of a hard one and there's no real clear answer here. On one hand, the OnePlus Nord N20 does have an AMOLED display, and I do think this makes a huge difference, especially if you're going outside in the sun a lot, because the viewing angles are a lot better on the OnePlus Nord N20. I mean, which one would you rather have when you're outside in the sun? I can tell you from experience, this is going to be pretty hard to see. But on the other hand, with the OnePlus Nord N20, even when you're wearing sunglasses, the visibility is actually still pretty good. But on the other hand, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a much higher refresh rate, and it's also bigger with better dimensions. The Moto G Stylus 5G also does have more storage, with 256GB on the factory unlocked version versus 128. Again, like I said before, if you're not really a power user, this probably won't even matter to you, but definitely still keep it in mind. The Moto G Stylus 5G also does have an ultra-wide camera, whereas the OnePlus Nord N20 only has a macro camera and not an ultra-wide camera, so if you do want that feature, keep that in mind as well. As far as the processor goes, I would pretty much ignore this this part because they have the exact same processor, and despite the Moto G Stylus 5G, or at least this version of it, having more RAM, I can tell you from experience you're really not going to see a difference in performance. The Moto G Stylus 5G also does have a newer version of Android, a slightly larger battery, and of course, as the name of the phone suggests, it does have a stylus, and while still not being anywhere near flagship level, this is probably the best stylus I've ever seen on a mid-range phone. So if you do want that feature, definitely keep that in mind. But again, on the other hand, the OnePlus Nord N20 does have much better fast charging, and in general, it honestly just looks and feels a lot more premium. So again, at the end of the day, both of these phones are really good devices that provide a lot of value for the money, and it really just comes down to what you value the most. But this concludes my comparison between the OnePlus Nord N20 and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Remember, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But I hope you found this video useful and informative. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to follow Kalipas Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.